We are commencing legal action against Mrs. Meghan Markle. Her televised allegations, particularly the Oprah interview, have inflicted undue harm upon the royal family. An apology no longer suffices. The matter will now proceed through
The command did not arrive through a speech, a public proclamation, or a carefully rehearsed palace announcement. It came behind closed doors, delivered in a voice so calm that the severity of the decision took several seconds to register. King Charles had ordered senior palace staff to begin stripping Meghan of her last remaining royal title. No delay, no negotiation, and most chilling of all, no private warning before the machinery of the monarchy began moving against her. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles issued the instruction during an emergency morning meeting at Buckingham Palace. He directed the Lord Chamberlain's office, the department that oversees royal ceremonies and official household procedure, to work with legal advisors on removing Meghan's title from palace records, ceremonial documents, and future communications. The order mattered because that title was her final institutional link to royal life. She and Harry had lived outside the working monarchy for years, yet its survival still suggested that some connection remained. Removing it would turn distance into permanent separation. The king stayed seated after the room emptied. He lifted the signed memorandum, an official written command recording his decision, read the first line again, and placed it face down. No relief crossed his face. No satisfaction followed. He understood that reversing the order later would make the crown look weak, while carrying it through would deepen a family wound that had never fully closed. Meghan received the news in California through a secure message while preparing for a scheduled meeting. She read it once, dismissed everyone, and closed the door. The Duchess was shaken not only by the threatened loss, but by the discovery that Charles had acted, before allowing her to explain what the title meant to her children, her marriage, and the identity she had carried since entering the royal family. Urgency made the command even more disturbing. Palace staff were told to complete the internal amendments before the next major state engagement, suggesting that years of hostility were not the true trigger. Beside Charles's order rested a sealed file containing correspondence, legal assessments, and a transcript from a recent private exchange. Only 4 people had read it, and all agreed that leaving the title untouched posed a greater danger. William was informed before noon. The prince did not ask why his father had acted. He asked whether Meghan knew what the file contained. The command had been spoken, but its true force could not be understood until the people trapped inside it, and everything each of them stood to lose, were brought into the light. Behind every royal order stood a family argument that had never truly ended. Charles saw a monarchy struggling to protect its authority. Meghan saw a title tied to sacrifice, identity, and the children she believed had inherited a place in royal history. Between them stood Harry, no longer merely a prince defending his wife, but a son forced to decide whether his father's final boundary was an act of duty or an unforgivable betrayal. Charles believed the title had become inseparable from commercial ventures, public disputes, and repeated challenges to palace authority. Royal accountability meant the duty of those using royal status to follow the standards and limits set by the crown. For the king, this was no longer about popularity. It was about whether an official title could remain attached to a life operating entirely outside those rules. Meghan understood the loss in deeply personal terms. She saw the title as recognition of the years she had spent inside the institution, the scrutiny she endured, and the place her children held within the wider family. Removing it felt like an attempt to rewrite the past and declare that her contribution had never mattered. Harry learned of the signed decision through a palace aide rather than his father. He walked away from Meghan, gripped the kitchen counter, and asked whether the order had already been completed. When the aide confirmed it, he understood that Charles had deliberately closed the door before his son could intervene. The prince's disbelief quickly became anger. William felt no triumph at Windsor. He read the same memorandum, an official written record of the command, and paused over Harry's name in the attached family impact assessment. The future king supported restoring firm boundaries, yet he knew the decision would reopen every wound between the brothers and could destroy the last chance of reconciliation. Camilla warned Charles during a private recorded conversation that the removal would define his reign. She did not ask him to reverse it, but she predicted Meghan would not accept defeat quietly and that Harry might answer by exposing private family exchanges. Meghan responded with chilling calm. She instructed her representatives to request the complete legal basis for the order. Harry expected outrage, but she wanted evidence. She intended to discover who had convinced the monarch that action was unavoidable for everyone involved. The sealed file pointed back to one exact occasion, a private royal reception where Meghan made a declaration that transformed years of resentment into an immediate constitutional concern. To understand why Charles finally crossed the line, the story must return to the evening when one sentence changed the conflict from a family grievance into a royal emergency. For months, the palace had tolerated interviews, accusations, commercial projects, and public confrontations. None of them alone had forced Charles to act. The true trigger came during a private reception at St. James's Palace, where an invitation intended to lower tensions instead exposed how dangerously far apart both sides had moved. In a conversation heard by only 6 people, Meghan made a claim about her royal standing, and William immediately understood that the monarchy could no longer postpone a decision. Charles had arranged the reception as a final attempt to restore communication before an approaching royal anniversary. St. James's Palace, a historic royal residence still used for official gatherings, offered privacy without the weight of a public ceremony. Meghan and Harry arrived without press access. William, Camilla, and 2 senior courtiers joined them under strict confidentiality, meaning every word was expected to remain inside the room. The evening began with forced politeness. Charles asked about the children. Harry answered briefly, and the prince avoided his brother's eyes. Meghan remained composed while the king introduced a draft agreement controlling future references to royal status in public and commercial work. The document required her to seek palace approval before using the title in international projects, a limit designed to protect the crown from appearing to endorse ventures it did not control. Meghan pushed the paper back across the table. She said the identity had come through marriage and could not be restricted whenever the palace found her inconvenient. William answered quietly that a royal title was not private property but a public position sustained by trust. Harry immediately accused him of humiliating his wife. Chairs shifted. Voices sharpened. Charles raised one hand and demanded silence. Then Meghan delivered the sentence that changed everything. If the palace refused cooperation, she said, she would define the title's meaning independently through her own global platform. The room went still. Her words sounded less like frustration than a declaration that royal identity could survive outside the crown's authority. Charles remained with William after Meghan and Harry left. With no aides present, the king asked whether compromise could still protect the institution. The future king replied that delay would only make the rupture more destructive. A documented transcript of the exchange entered the sealed file that night, preserving every challenge, interruption, and warning for the legal advisors now preparing Charles's response. Nothing spoken there could now be dismissed as family anger. Before Charles signed the removal order, Meghan requested one final face-to-face meeting and insisted William attend. The reception created the crisis, but the final confrontation would determine whether the title could still be saved or whether the family had already passed beyond negotiation. There were no cameras, no advisors seated between them, and no carefully drafted statements to soften what was about to be said. Charles entered the private Windsor sitting room first. William followed. Meghan and Harry arrived together, but took separate chairs, a small gesture that revealed how differently they intended to fight. The king placed the disputed title document on the table and gave Meghan one final opportunity to accept palace restrictions. Her answer would end all remaining uncertainty. Charles offered one final compromise. He would suspend the removal order if Meghan signed a binding agreement, preventing the title from being used in commercial branding, political advocacy, or projects presented as carrying royal approval. A binding agreement was a formal promise with legal force, designed to prevent either side from changing the rules later. The king insisted that the restriction mattered because royal status could influence public trust, attract business, and suggest support from the crown even when none existed. Meghan rejected that interpretation. She said she had never falsely claimed to represent the monarch and argued that the palace wanted the prestige of her silence, while refusing to admit what she and Harry had endured inside royal life. Charles leaned forward. He told her the question was no longer whether she had suffered, but whether one person could claim royal authority while rejecting every duty attached to it. She met his stare and answered that the family could not demand loyalty after withdrawing protection. Harry turned toward William and accused him of engineering the confrontation. The prince remained controlled until his brother claimed he had always wanted Meghan erased. William answered quietly that protecting the crown was not the same as erasing a person. Harry heard only judgment. Meghan heard a warning. Charles slid a pen across the table. Meghan could sign the restrictions or allow the title removal process to continue. She lifted the pen and held it above the document for several seconds. Then she placed it beside the unsigned page. Accepting the terms, she said, would mean admitting that the palace owned her identity. The king closed the folder. The crown did not own her identity, he replied, but it did control its titles. His calmness made the decision feel final. Meghan left with William following moments later, but Harry remained behind to confront his father alone. He believed the monarch still possessed the power to stop everything. Charles was about to reveal that the final authority rested somewhere Harry had not expected. The emotional battle had ended without compromise, but the decisive struggle would now move from family pain to the hidden mechanisms that determine who may carry the crown's name. Royal power rarely announces itself with a raised voice. It moves through signatures, sealed instructions, amended records, and officials who understand that one changed line can alter a life. After Meghan rejected the compromise, Charles activated a process prepared in secret for weeks. Yet even the king could not act through emotion alone. Lawyers, constitutional advisors, and senior household officers had to transform his command into something permanent, and one hesitant courtier nearly stopped the entire operation. Charles ordered every part of the palace system to move together. His authority governed the royal household, the offices and staff serving the monarch, while legal advisors determined how ceremonial recognition, official usage, and institutional standing could be withdrawn without leaving confusion behind. Teams prepared revised website entries, new correspondence rules, future event protocols, charity instructions, and briefing language. Every reference had to change at once. One contradiction could suggest that the crown itself remained uncertain. Sir Jonathan Vail carried the heaviest burden. The fictional senior courtier responsible for circulating the directive had served at Meghan and Harry's wedding and still remembered their optimism. Alone in his office, he read the final order twice. His hand hovered over the authorization key, the secure approval required to release the instruction across palace departments. For several seconds, memory fought duty. Then he pressed it. Harry remained with his father after the others left. He asked Charles to delay the process for the sake of the grandchildren, warning that permanent action would reach far beyond Meghan. The king's voice softened, but his answer did not. Affection, he said, could not become an exemption from institutional limits. Harry understood that the man before him had separated fatherhood from monarchy, and the distance between them suddenly felt impossible to cross. One legal advisor still objected through a written memorandum, an official note setting out legal risks. A rushed announcement, the advisor warned, might turn Meghan into a symbol of royal punishment, rather than settle the dispute. Charles read the recommendation and wrote one instruction in the margin, complete before the state opening. William had not issued the command, but he had supplied the decisive argument. During a documented private discussion, the prince warned that endless ambiguity would trap the next reign inside a conflict inherited from the current one. By evening, the changes were ready. Then an aide discovered Meghan had prepared a response containing a private promise Charles once made to Harry. The crown had completed its preparations, but the first consequences would not emerge from legal documents. They would erupt from the family memory Meghan was now prepared to expose. At precisely 9 o'clock, the palace language changed. The title disappeared from official schedules, future correspondence instructions were amended, and a short declaration confirmed that Meghan would no longer be recognized under her former royal designation. The removal was bureaucratically clean and emotionally brutal. Within minutes, phones began ringing on 2 continents. Yet the most devastating reaction did not come from Meghan. It came from Harry, who recognized the exact wording as a phrase once used by his mother. Buckingham Palace issued the statement by direction of Charles and ordered staff to apply the change immediately. An official royal designation was the title used by the monarchy in formal records, ceremonies, invitations, and public communications. Its removal meant Meghan would now appear under her personal name in palace material. Charities received private instructions to revise their listings, while archived biographies, future invitations, and ceremonial references were quietly amended to prevent any suggestion that the old status remained active. Harry read the declaration on his phone and stopped at the phrase, in the long-term interests of the monarchy. He remembered hearing similar language during discussions about Diana's future, when institutional survival had been placed above personal pain. Anger overwhelmed him. He threw the phone onto a sofa and accused the palace of repeating history, using calm words to hide a deeply human rejection. Meghan heard him, but she did not answer immediately. Meghan stood before a mirror, preparing for a public appearance. She removed a piece of jewelry connected to her royal wedding and placed it inside a drawer. Her team waited for instructions. The Duchess did not cry in front of them, yet her voice faltered as she told everyone to remove the title from introductions, briefing notes, and event materials. The loss became real through each deleted word. Her advisors urged retaliation. Meghan had drafted a response, quoting a private assurance Charles once gave Harry after their departure, that family ties would never be reduced to paperwork. Publishing it could expose the king as a man who had broken his promise. She refused. Revealing the confidence in anger, she said, would let the palace describe her as reckless, and would destroy the last private trust between father and son. That restraint reached William through a documented briefing and changed his view. For the first time, the prince contacted Meghan directly and requested a private conversation without Charles, Harry, lawyers, or courtiers. The title had been removed, but Meghan's refusal to strike back opened an unexpected door, and behind it waited the one conversation capable of changing what the decision would ultimately mean. For years, William and Meghan had spoken through statements, family intermediaries, accusations, and memories sharpened by distance. This time there were no aides, no spouses, and no institution to absorb the impact. The future king called her directly and asked for 20 minutes. Meghan accepted on one condition. Neither of them would defend the past. What followed was not reconciliation, forgiveness, or surrender. It was something rarer inside royal conflict, a conversation in which both finally admitted what they feared losing. William contacted Meghan through a secure line and made one fact clear before anything else. He was not calling to reverse Charles's command. The removal had already been completed. A secure line was a protected channel designed to prevent outsiders from hearing or recording the exchange, and both understood why that mattered. For once, no courtier would reshape their words, and no statement would soften what either chose to admit. Meghan told him the title itself mattered less than what its loss said to her children. She feared they would grow up believing their mother had been formally rejected by the family into which they were born. William answered that royal status could not remain separate from royal responsibility. Yet she insisted the punishment had become a way to silence someone who refused to hide her experience. William then admitted what he had never said publicly. His greatest fear was leaving George a monarchy weakened by unresolved family wars. The prince supported the decision not because he hated Meghan, but because every ambiguity delayed today could become his son's crisis tomorrow. For the first time, she heard anxiety beneath his control rather than hostility. Meghan made an unexpected request. She did not ask for restoration. Instead, she asked for written assurance that her children's place in the family record would never be erased and that her years of service would not be treated as an embarrassment. William agreed during the private call. In return, she promised not to use the removed title and not to release Charles's earlier assurance to Harry. Silence followed. Meghan understood that the promise could not restore public status, but it could protect belonging. William understood that removing a title without preserving the human record would turn necessary discipline into punishment, leaving another generation to inherit bitterness instead of truth. Neither felt victorious when the conversation ended. Yet the threatened public war had been stopped, the title dispute was settled, and a narrow boundary had been drawn between institutional separation and personal erasure. Their private understanding could not undo the king's command, but it shaped how the world would interpret it when the removal exploded across front pages the following morning. By sunrise, the decision was no longer contained within palace walls. It belonged to broadcasters, crowds, commentators, and millions of people who saw in the title dispute something larger than one royal marriage. To some, Charles had defended the dignity of the crown. To others, he had punished a woman who refused to conform. But one newspaper front page captured the public mood more powerfully than any debate: a wedding portrait divided by a stark black line beneath 3 words: the final severance. British broadcasters interrupted regular programs as constitutional experts, former palace staff, and royal historians argued over what the order meant. Constitutional authority was the system of powers and limits governing how the monarchy operates within the state, and every commentator offered a different verdict. Some believed Charles had restored discipline by proving that royal status could not survive without royal responsibility. Others warned that the king had transformed a family wound into the defining fracture of his reign. Buckingham Palace refused to add anything beyond the formal announcement. Staff received strict instructions not to brief against Meghan or release personal accusations. William had insisted that removing the title must not become a campaign of humiliation. The prince wanted a boundary, not revenge, because public cruelty would weaken the very institution he claimed to protect. Rain fell outside the palace as a divided crowd gathered near the gates. One woman held a handwritten sign declaring, "A title can be removed, but history cannot." Across the barrier, another person raised a placard reading, "Duty must still mean something." The two messages captured the conflict exactly. One defended memory, while the other demanded accountability. Charles saw the most brutal image at breakfast. He studied the front page showing the divided wedding portrait, while Camilla watched him fold the newspaper slowly. The king admitted that he had expected anger, but not the pain of seeing his family's collapse reduced to one headline. She said nothing, yet remained beside him as he confronted the cost of his command. Meghan appeared hours later at a scheduled charitable event under her personal name. Reporters shouted questions, but she continued toward the podium without answering. Then she delivered a carefully prepared statement. Identity, she said, came from service, family, and conviction, not from a style placed before a name. She neither attacked Charles nor mourned the title. Her restraint held. Harry remained wounded, the monarch remained burdened, and William remained firm, but the threatened exchange of private accusations never came. With the public battle contained and the title gone, only one question remained to be settled. Not what Charles had removed, but what every person involved had become after losing it. In the end, there was no triumphant winner standing above the wreckage. Charles preserved the crown's authority, but paid for it as a father. Meghan lost the title but refused to let the removal define her future. Harry saw another royal door close and understood that fury could no longer reopen it. William secured the boundary he believed the next reign required, yet discovered that duty without humanity could become its own form of failure. Several days later, Charles faced the final implementation record alone. The document, an official confirmation that every palace department had completed the removal, waited beneath his hand. He paused before signing, aware that one name would close the last path back. Then the king wrote it without alteration. The title would not return. His authority had survived, but the father beneath the crown understood that permanence carried its own grief. Meghan answered the loss with control. She instructed her team to use only her personal name across charitable and professional materials. The change mattered because it removed the final public sign of institutional belonging, yet she refused to build a campaign around what had been taken. Her future work, she said in a documented staff meeting, would decide how she was remembered. Harry confronted the same truth differently. He placed the palace correspondence inside a locked drawer instead of releasing it. The prince knew exposure might wound Charles, but it would not restore the title, repair their relationship, or protect his children. Restraint became his reluctant acceptance that anger could no longer reverse the decision. William completed his own final act. He sent Meghan the written assurance protecting her children's place in the family record and preserving an honest account of her royal service. The future king received only 2 words in reply: "Thank you." No warmth followed, but neither did another attack. The rupture became permanent yet contained. Charles and Harry remained emotionally separated. William and Meghan established a narrow boundary based on responsibility rather than trust. The family gained certainty, but certainty arrived without comfort, reunion, or illusion that the damage had healed. The crown emerged more clearly defined, but visibly less whole. Meghan moved forward without official status, while the monarchy continued without her. Neither side kept everything it once hoped to preserve, yet both finally accepted separation's price. The title vanished from the palace record, but the deeper judgment remained. Authority could decide who represented the crown, while history would decide whether the cost of that decision had been strength, sacrifice, or sorrow. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.